what I am performing here is the simplest version of the one-handed backhand. Now, this doesn't look a whole lot like what Alexa was just doing from the baseline, but if you start from this swing, you are going to be able to build into that swing in a way that feels comfortable and controllable. You know, if I add all the pieces in, there is a relatively precise, I promise you can learn it, but a relatively precise way that those things link together so that you can actually control where the racket ends up in the air while doing that. The foundation, though, is this. So let me talk about a couple properties of this swing. First of all, see how I am not starting with the racket head above my hand. The simplest possible version of the swing is flat. It doesn't have a lot of topspin, and the racket just moves back to front through the ball. We're going to talk about using a little bit of gravity and more of this preparation to add spin later, but for now we're here. The most critical piece here is engagement of the upper back. When you're in your prep, in your simplest effective one-hander, take this and engage it. Now, you're not going to pull your shoulder blades together like a pull-up. That's an exaggeration. But you are using the muscles back here around the shoulder blade, not the traps. We're not pulling up here. We are down and back just a little bit. That's going to let me hold the racket very stably. You know, this racket is very stable. My arm is very easy to maneuver. And then look at the ball. And a tiny little pull through. Tiny little pull through. This is the simplest version of the string. Everything that we are going to build later, which is going to ultimately let you fire through the shot from the baseline the way you were watching before, is built off of this foundation. Now, you might have noticed that I've hit almost all of these in a fully open stance or a primarily open stance. The beautiful thing about the simplest version of the swing is if I'm not releasing the shoulder out here, then I actually don't need the sideways orientation. In order to get the little pull forward, I can be totally open. So the simplest version of the swing actually has a ton of flexibility in the stance that works. All you're trying to do is feel that little activation here, that little pull with the upper back, and put it through the ball. So I can do it fully open, or if I want to close my stance, that little pull still goes through the ball. So that's kind of the first property of the simplest effective swing. And one thing you might notice as you see really good one-handers rallying is sometimes they might get time pressure and they might hit here, and sometimes they might have a lot of time and they might hit here. The reason we build off of this foundation is that it's usable all through here, regardless of how you end up forced to set up to play the ball. So let's talk about spin and gravity. Now again, we are now layering on top of this simple foundation to make the swing more dynamic. Instead of preparing here, use your left hand and prepare here. And now, gravity is going to make the racket go like this. Now, I want you to look at my grip here. It is roughly 90 degrees, so that my forearm and arm can roll like this. If you have more of a continentalist grip with a slant here, this roll doesn't work for producing the stroke. So very important before we talk about, you know, the exact mechanics of how we're doing this, this is the grip that works with the one-hander. The more you extend out here, the more that's going to start to break. So tip of the racket has a little bit of momentum. If I start it here rather than start it here, it will fall, and then it will spring off of my forearm, and it'll go back up. So that is this. This is still the simplest effective backhand, but now with just a little bit of gravity loop. Now, I do want to stress that if I completely relax during this gravity portion, the stroke really doesn't work. So I cannot completely relax into this, or I can't control the racket head at all. You have to feel it kind of land on this. And this is one of the reasons with with racket specs, you have to make sure you're not using a racket that's so heavy you can't do this. The weight of this has to kind of land on your hand here. If you just drop it all the way down here, you can't hit. So I'll hit a couple more of those so you can see. So you'll notice even though the racket tip is falling, it is still very clearly landing on a soft tissue complex. It is not falling, all the way down here. in a way that makes it almost impossible to get through a particular spot in the air. Now, before we go back to the baseline, the last thing I want to talk about with the simple versions of the stroke is contact height. So on a couple higher balls, the engagement of this is so important for making this comfortable. Or a little higher even. When I want to take a ball like this, and I want to drive it through the court. Okay, that is, I'm going to say, physically impossible without this being strong and engaged. I'm going to show you what that looks like now. Same mental process, but without using this for stability and aiming my racket head. I'm now not going to do that. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I hit the strings at least. That one went in. That one was 3 feet out. So it's like, okay, you know, from a viewer's perspective, it might be hard to tell. The difference between my ability to get this racket head squarely on ball every time versus not is the engagement back here, both during prep and, of course, throughout the entire swing. Now, you might think, okay, that looked really good. What about when the ball is lower? Well, when the ball is lower, the tricky part is if I stand up straight, but my arm is attached, well, my arm's attached here and I'm standing up straight, so I can't do that. The solution is not to like drop the arm in here. Then you're gonna lose what we just talked about that's so valuable. So the solution, like we always talk about, chest to the ground, and now this exact same swing goes low to high. Obviously as well, the more I can get that double bend, so it's not just chest to the ground, bend at the knees is very helpful as well. And now that swing feels almost exactly the same as it feels up high, but we're down here. So, you know, it's the same core principles as the forehand, where we design this so that it really works for control and power. Then we attach this to it, and we use this to adjust so that this feeling can always feel similar. The last thing I want to say before we move back and talk about accelerating through this, and you can watch Alexa hit some more, is you need strength for this shot. So, you know, I know everything I just talked about. Like, I know it intellectually, but I'm going to use my racket with the lead on it that I use my right hand with my left hand, and you're going to see, even though I know everything intellectually, you know, I just can't quite, like, I'm hitting the ball here, but these aren't on the center of the racket. Yeah, that one was on the bottom. Like, at a certain point, with the one-hander in particular, the physical strength of this apparatus is extremely important. If you don't have that strength, then the physical ability to produce this swing, independent of what you know about technique, is going to be compromised. So, you know, if you get out on the court and you're like, man, coach, like, I'm trying to do that, it just doesn't feel right. It's possible this is just too weak, or you don't know how to use it. And you know, maybe try with a lighter racket, or try from closer into the court where the balls are moving slower, where you don't need as much strength to get it through the air, and see if that helps. But, you know, fundamentally, the feeling of ripping a one-hander with control is a feeling of attacking the ball with this part of your back. So now we're back at the baseline. The first thing I want to make it clear is your simplest effective backhand still works back here. So just because we're at the baseline doesn't, okay, I didn't hit that one quite hard enough, but just because we're at the baseline doesn't actually mean we have to do this, doesn't actually mean we have to really release the shoulder. The simplest effective backhand, if I just pull slightly harder, is completely fine for making these balls. Now, what I'm going to do here, still simplest effective, still quite flat, and I'm just going to add a little bit more with my hips and my trunk, just a little bit, just connecting. Now, you might notice, oh, all of a sudden when I add that little pulse, now my depth is getting a little stressed. If I slightly miss it, I hit it long. That's the reason we're going to end up adding topspin, is because when I give the simplest effective backhand that little pulse, all of a sudden now I can't hit it as hard as I want without hitting it out. So now it's the same principle, but I'm going to hold the racket up here. And now it brings that down into the court. But of course, this thing I'm doing now, it's much more harder to time this. And it's much more harder to time this with trunk than it is to time the simplest. So as you make the stroke better and more dynamic, it gets more difficult to time, but of course, more effective. And that's the trade-off here, which is why on a serve return, you'll probably use a shot like this, because all that really matters is timing. Whereas, if somebody hits you like a hand toss ball, that's when you want more of a full release through the swing. Now we're going to switch, talk about some height adjustments and some other things you can do from back here to get that swing from the simplest stroke to that full swing.
Now, one of the things we do in our online program is we have players send us videos of what things feel like to them. So all these sensations I'm describing, what your chest feels, what your back feels, what your trunk feels, through the swing, through the prep, the ways that Alexa is able to hit like this, if you're stuck, if you feel like, coach, I hear what you're saying, but I can't feel it, we can help you. We can give you personalized advice. You can talk us through exactly what you're feeling, get personalized response and guidance. So if you're interested in that, check out the link below, and let's get back to it.
So I want to talk about the feeling of releasing the shoulder through the shot. So that's what Alexa's doing here. This feeling of the shoulder coming in here, rolling and driving out this way, that does not require you to deload this, early. And there's a feeling of release and connection, but you get that release and connection here with stability back here still. So, if you try to lock this in and you pull your trap up, that's probably when you're going to get like, wait, coach, if I engage, I can't release the shoulder. If you pull it more down and back, that's where you're going to feel comfortable still releasing, even though you're stable here. So what Alexa's going to do now is she's going to do a demo where she's not connected in here. She's not attacking the ball with this part of her body. Maybe she's flicking it more, or it's more wristy, or there's a lot more releasing. And see, you can't immediately tell how it's gone wrong, but you can just tell that she doesn't quite have control over what's happening through the air the way she used to. And it's okay, it's close, right? She's a little wide. You might think, oh, she's a little wide. She's close to a good swing. But the level of control is just not there. And so now switch back to stabilizing that shot. And all of a sudden, very similar behaviors with the rest of the body, all of a sudden, they now actually connect with the ball in the air, because that upper back lets you actually aim the entire kinetic chain into that ball in the air. And that's what's so critical about this backhand from the baseline, is you don't lose that stable unit when we're attaching to it. Now, contact height is similar from up here. The only difference is, down there, I would go here and just go here. Now, obviously, I also have to get some rotation to power the shot, but it's the same principle. Try to adjust here and let your arm fire through in a similar feeling way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Alexa some higher ones here. Here, you're going to be more straight up, and the racket is going to come more back to front. Again, without that stabilization, it's going to be very difficult to get the racket to connect with the ball. With that stabilization, it's going to feel much more, you're going to feel much more crisp through the air, like you can actually swing the racket through the ball in space. Now, the other extreme, we don't want it to feel too different. It's going to feel a little different, obviously, but we want to make a lot of the adjustment with the body. So she's a lot more bent over. The knees are more bent. The chest is more facing to the ground, and she can now still engage that upper back the way she's doing before. That racket head tip is up. She's using that little bit of gravity, and the whole swing is still very connected, even though the contact is now here instead of up here. So we've talked a lot about the right arm here, but just like how we talk about the forehand being a two-handed pressing action, you are going to feel a lot better on the one-hander if you use a two-handed pulling action. So it is about your right side. So this isn't like if I put my mental attention on my left side, then the swing becomes kind of random. What this and this is, specifically this is leverage here. It is a tool to help you aim the right side of your racket. So when I'm doing stuff like this, all this was using my entire body to aim this, rather than, I could probably, I can still hit it here, right? It's just, that one was a little long because I didn't quite have I don't quite have the same stability. So, it's not like it's impossible. The right side is what matters, but you get so much more balance and control over where the pulling action ends up if you use your entire back and both hands to pull, because now I can actually really pull that straight through whatever spot in the air I want, because I almost have twice as much control, twice as much body. As far as holding the throat of the racket, personally, I really like to use the left hand to adjust the amount of cock for topspin. As far as coming into the ball, there is, so that one I threw it in with the left hand a little more. This one, I took it off a little earlier. A lot of that just experiment, figure out what feels good for you. There's not really a right answer there. You just can't go too far or the swing breaks down. And if you let go too early, you're probably going to have a harder time finding your contact. So there's a middle ground for how long you hold it that'll help you find that rhythm. Now I want to go back to talking about hitting flat. So from the baseline, obviously, when we hit flat, there is a limit on velocity, otherwise the ball goes out. And topspin is how we break that limit. If I try to hit this ball really hard flat, it's going to go into the net. And if I'm like, okay, well, I obviously have to clear the net, then it's going to go out. But as you start to move into the court, the trade-off there is more towards hitting flat. The higher and shorter ones, we're getting to the point now where we have enough geometric advantage over the net that you might find you don't want to do this anymore. You want to just start here and swing straighter through it. Now, on an approach shot like this, I can still add a little bit of roll to that ball. It's an equilibrium. You just kind of have to build your intuition for how high the ball is, how far inside the court you are for what you want to do. But always remember that the flatter the shot is, the more back to front you swing, the easier that ball is to time. The more roll you use, the more you risk mishitting your contact zone. So one thing I see from a lot of players is even if they have like a decent one-hitter, they get this kind of approach shot and they hit it like that. And it's like, well, I can't. I'm going to get passed immediately on that shot. I mean, that ball is, this is not really, that's not like, yeah, it's not the easiest ball, but that's not really like winning you the point in the same way that, nice, giving it just like a nice quick little flat punch and following it in. You're going to win a lot more points like that. Now, like I said, when we're back here, right, you're going to need more of that rolling action. You're going to need more of that, dropping the hand and hitting up on the ball, but you do pay a cost for that. And there's going to be a lot of situations where if you can hit flat, you're going to find your one-hander as a much more complete stroke. So that's really the last thing I want to talk about in this video is what this lets you do is it lets you play with variety. I can play this ball or I can play that ball. A lot of times what I see from people that don't have this is either they only have this ball, so they only have this, and it's like that can kind of work, but then of course as the ball gets lower, now you can't really drive like a rally ball with that, or it's a little too gravity driven, it's a little too loose, and they only have this, and like it's a playable ball. I mean, it's not that easy to attack that ball, but of course now as a shorter and higher one comes in, now I don't have the tools to really do anything here. And I just have to kind of, I mean, I could approach on this, I guess, if I wanted to, but like, you don't really have the tools to do anything there. So connect here, feel the racket head in the air as a first principle, and that will give you the tools to play, oh, just a little bit long. That will give you the tools to play, there it is, different balls differently.